Well, let's just look at it from a clean slate. We have no livestock whatsoever. We have no crops. We have nothing. What is the best option for us?
Starting with a clean slate, I'm sure at some point that's crossed your mind.
If we're working ourselves crazy, that's no lie.
Whether it's with your ranch business or even your personal life, things can start to feel cluttered, disorganized, overwhelming, or stuck in a rut. And in many cases, not all, it starts with this:
profitability, or the lack of profitability.
So today, Allan Crockett returns as our guest as he walks us through what we can do to reset, a conversation that will target nearly every one of us in ranching, for those that are so busy that life has lost its luster, to those stuck in a rut or feeling as though the business has plateaued, or the ones that have so many things going on that they're not doing anything well.
Does it make enough money that it truly contributes in a big enough fashion to be part of this business going forward?
Plus, we'll discuss company culture and the dangers of being resistant to change. It's not just a show for the decision makers or the ranch owners. This is also for the next gen ranchers as well. What does it take to have a clean slate? On this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for tuning in and joining us here on our program today. Yeah, as you heard there in the opening, we're going to be tackling a topic that really for all of us in agriculture, maybe you're feeling it now, maybe you have felt this at one point, of just getting things started over. If you could do that, what would you do differently? Always pleased to have Allan Crockett joining us here on our program, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, I did want to mention as well that we do have a lot of shows. This is episode 189, so if you go back and you look through our library of shows, there's a lot of topics in there that are always going to be relevant no matter when you listen to them. You can find it at our podcast site at workingranchradio.com, or if you have a preferred podcast provider, you can go out there as well. And also, I'd ask, if you like a show or like what you hear, leave us a rating or review. That is always appreciated as well. Now, make sure you tune in through the rest of this show. Of course, later on in the program, meteorologist Don Day will be in to give us a look at that long-term weather. And of course, the captain, Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. So as we turn to our program here at hand today, always pleased to have a good friend of mine, Allan Crockett, joining us here on the program. Allan, glad to have you here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
My pleasure, Justin. I always enjoy visiting with you.
Well, I do too. And what people don't know is we've chatted for about 40 minutes before we ever started here, our conversation here today, because we're friends. There's a lot of things we like to talk about. And of course, with a lot of the changes going on in our country right now and the recent election that took place, there's conversations with that. And then just in general, we both enjoy talking about the fact of, where ranch businesses, how we take ranch businesses to the next level. And that's, of course, where my friendship and acquaintance with you started many years ago, was your help with our ranching operation. And so when we look at our topic here today, clean slate, if you could do whatever you want, what would you do? And I think at this point in time, it's November. We're we're not quite to the end of the year. Yet at the same time, I think for a lot of us, we're starting to look, we're looking ahead. We're doing projections and what's this next year. We're looking at markets and things like that. And from a timing standpoint, it's a good time to be thinking about, if you could do something different, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a great segue into what we're talking about, Justin. And you're right. It's, here we are in November. We just finished an election in this country, and this idea of a clean slate. And a lot of times, we get into January or into December, people start setting New Year's resolutions, and most of those go out the door within a few days into the new year. Maybe they last for a month or two. But what is so special about, January 1st, or it's a new quarter or a new month? So today is a day you could start with a clean slate. And really, that's what I like to talk about with clients. If you had a clean slate, what would you do?
Yeah. So one of the things as you and I were talking about ahead of this is, I think for a lot of us, there's always times when you start to get overwhelmed, maybe by what's going on in your ranch. Maybe it's your business business, maybe it's the personal side of things. But when we look at the ranch side of things, what have you seen where you're dealing with ranches yourself and visiting with folks? what are some of the things that you have identified as markers of saying, okay, this is what is leading to this mindset of just kind of feeling overwhelmed with your ranch business?
More often than not, I'd even say the vast majority of the time, it is profitability or the lack of profitability. And when we're not making money, we get stressed about that. Or if things are tight, it's touch and go. We may make money, we may not make money. It's really close. That feeling of being overwhelmed and the stress that comes with it, those are the things that typically will lead somebody to reach out to me. Sometimes it's grazing, sometimes it's a drought issue or a fire's come through. Now, what do we do? But really, it comes back to money. And I'm going to take that even a step further. It's really quality of life. And for quality of life, we have to have money. I mean, we live in a modern world where money is a necessity. And so we have to have money, number one, but we need to have time to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And if we are making money, we got to have time to be able to go enjoy some things. And then I think alongside that, the third leg of that is relationships. And if money is tight, or if we don't have time to do things with our spouse, our children, our grandchildren, family, if we don't have time to spend there and money to enjoy that, or the relationship is hurting, and almost always the relationship starts hurting when money becomes an issue or lack thereof. When we're not profitable and the stress that we take home, we don't just close the door to the outside world when we come home at night. As ranchers, we're still thinking about profitability. We're thinking about grazing. We're thinking about the drought. We're thinking about the market, government policy, whatever it is. And we don't just close the door and now, okay, we don't think about that until we walk outside the next morning. It's part of who we are. It's part of our life and our lifestyle. So any weight that we carry in the business almost always gets carried in the house at night, when we go home. And if we're stressed, it shows up in our relationship with our spouse. It shows up in our relationship with our children. And so profitability is almost always one of the things that will lead people to reach out to me. The other thing that a lot of times people reach out is they are profitable, but they're not living the quality of life they like to live with those other things, relationships, time, purpose comes into play there. What's my real purpose in life? And maybe they feel like they've reached a plateau, and now how do I grow this to a new level? So usually it's one of those two things that people reach out. It's either a profitability issue or, hey, I've accomplished a lot, but I want to go further, and I don't know what further looks like. I don't know where that is, and I need some help clarifying that.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking about that, and you and I were talking about this even before we went on air, and I was making a comment in the fact that, we've got our ranch business, we got our personal life, our family life, to keep those, somewhat have some boundaries between personally what's going on and the ranch business. And of course, that's almost an oxymoron in the fact of the type of business and the type of element that we are in ranching, isn't it?
It really is an oxymoron. But I find that true because I work with other people besides ranchers, small business owners, family businesses, and I find the same dynamic in those family kind of businesses with small businesses also. I think you said the word boundaries, and I think that's something as a business owner or a manager in a business, we have to set those boundaries. And several years ago, I worked with a guy, and the boundary that he had set, he had an office in his home. Mine is behind my house, and I know you have a home office. Mm-hmm. But he made the comment to me, he says, at 6:00 in the evening, he says, I close the door to my office and I shut off my cell phone. And he says, I'm done with business for the day. Now, whether or not he could 100% shut down his mind, I don't know, because it's hard to do that. But I think having those kinds of boundaries, I mean, when I leave my office, whatever time of day it is, I don't always lock the door, but I'll lock it in the evening and I don't come back. And the same in the morning, when I come out, I'll lock the office door and now I'm at work. And so I think having a boundary like that and setting an hour where, okay, business is over. Now let's just talk family stuff. Let's talk church stuff. Let's talk politics. I don't know, let's just talk other things besides business. And I know that's really hard because we sit down to eat dinner and, the first thing we start doing in the evening is start talking about what we did this day and what we need to do tomorrow. Or we sit down at the breakfast table, okay, now what are we going to do today? And so I think setting some boundaries, they don't necessarily have to be chiseled in stone, but just setting boundaries of here's my family life and here's my work life. And there is a distinction and a separation there. But if we don't set the boundaries, there will be none because nobody else is going to set them for us. There'll be no boundaries. And then it just all melds together and it's just one big life. And when it gets ugly because of a drought or a market or lack of profitability or we plateaued and don't know where to go next, but that carries over into our home life or our family life, and that's not good.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a break here, Allan. When we come back, I want to jump into a little more detail as we talk about the clean slate. And if you could start over, what would that look like? What would you be doing? You hit on three things there in terms of, looking at profitability, quality of life, and I think another big thing is, have you plateaued? Is where you're at? Do you feel like you've not, you're kind of at this steady point? Where do we need to go with the next level on that? And so when we come back, I want to start to look at that, about how we can start to get that slate cleaned up and what are the steps we could be looking at as we move forward. We're going to be talking about this not only from a ranch life, business thing. We might even get into some elements of the personal life. And Allan, we didn't talk about this before we went on air, but I want to talk and hit a group of folks that could be listening that are maybe ranch workers that are on the place. Maybe it's the son or the daughter that's on the place, because it's a little bit different for them. But at the same time, they could be feeling some of this as well. Maybe they've plateaued. They're stuck where they're at, and they want to look at ways, how do we move beyond that? So that's kind of the outline of the rest of our conversation here today. Folks, we'll be back with Allan after this. This segment today brought to you by Zoetis. Back your instincts and feel more confident in your replacement selection this fall with Inherent Select from Zoetis. Visit beefgenetics.com/working ranch to get started.
It's decision time. Which heifers are you keeping? Which are you selling? Make sort gate decisions easier with genomic EPDs for your commercial females. Back your instincts with Inherit Select from Zoetis. Feel more confident knowing you're selecting heifers with the potential to be the most productive and profitable in your herd. Keep the best. Sell the rest. Zoetis makes it easy. Order free supplies today so you can easily collect tissue samples when you work cattle this fall. Visit beefgenetics.com/working ranch to get started.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, as we set up in the last segment, kind of the preface of what we were going to be talking about here today, and at this point, maybe folks are feeling, as some folks feel, like a little bit overwhelmed. Things have moved in their ranch business to a point to where maybe not sure the next step they need to take. Overwhelmed, a lot of things, decisions have been made. Maybe your business has plateaued, a lot of those things. So when we look at that, as we've talked about what propagates that in the last segment, let's start to now grab that eraser, we've got the slate. The slate, of course, is an older term of an old chalkboard. Maybe people don't understand what I'm talking about there, but back in the day, a slate was a chalkboard. So if we got all this, busy chalkboard on the wall in front of us, and if we start to grab that and we start to erase that and figure out where we're going to start over, well, let's start with some steps. What are some things that we can begin to do to begin to start with that clean slate we've been talking about?
Yeah. That idea came to me several years ago with a client, and I'd worked for this guy even years before that, and would make some changes in their business, but he's an absentee owner, the family's an absentee owner, has a hired manager, and he called me up one day and he said, I want to hire you again. And I said, well, what's going on? He says, well, we're just not making enough money. He says, I'm still having to put money into the business from other investments and things, and in essence, he was subsidizing his ranch business. He says, I can afford to do that, but I'm tired of doing it. And then he said this, he says, you have a clean slate, do whatever you want. And so I outlined, I said, we're looking probably a 6-month progress, and this is what it's going to cost. And so we got started. And step one was sit down with his ranch manager, and they had, 9 or 10 different enterprises on the ranch. And we tore every one of those apart and looked at it from a gross margin perspective, and which ones were profitable, which ones were not. And if they were, what needs to happen to make it profitable? And if we couldn't figure that out, then let's just eliminate it. Let's get rid of it, because it's not contributing to the profitability of the business. It's causing stress. And I remember one enterprise it had a 2-cent market swing. I mean, it had a positive gross margin, but a 2-cent swing in the market would take it to a negative gross margin. And the manager said, well, it's profitable. I said, you want to live with that kind of stress? And he said, no. I said, well, let's get rid of it. And so we did. We eliminated, I think it's 5 different enterprises that they had. And then we focused on the ones that were making money and how we could make more money with those enterprises. So I think number one, that's the first step. We have to know what the numbers are, and we have to be honest with that. We can't start looking pie in the sky. Well, if the market does this, it'll be positive. We can't do that. We just got to look at it and say, no, it's not working, and we don't see a way to fix it, so let's get rid of it, and be brutally honest about that. And then I think another step in there is, we talked about quality of life in the previous segment, but look at that, because if we as business leaders or ranch owners or business owners or the manager of the ranch, if we're working ourselves crazy, that's no lie. And if our employees, if we have hired employees and they're doing the same thing, whether that's family or non-family members, makes no difference. But if they're just work, we got to realize that, hey, they need some time off, set some boundaries. We started this time of day and we quit at this time of day, unless any emergencies come up, a broken water line or cows are out, or, and I get it, during calving season and branding and shipping and stuff. Preg testing, we're going to work some longer hours. But I think we have to set some boundaries there that not only for us, we talked about in the previous segment, but for employees also. Here's what the normal day looks like on this place. Here's what the normal week looks like. Here's our start time. Here's our quit time. Unless there's an emergency, and then abide by that and live by it, and we'll find that people are happier and we're happier, and especially if we're making money, then that goes a long ways to create happiness. And money can't buy happiness, well, the lack of it can't buy it either. So having a profitable business gets rid of the stress and allows us to experience some joy in life. So that's kind of where we start is right there, looking at the numbers.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking about that and beginning to analyze the different enterprises, you start to accumulate, just like we accumulate stuff, but there's enterprises that we kind of collect, like lint in the bottom of your pocket. And sometimes they're a hobby and we like it, we like to do it, but it's not there. And those can be really time consumers.
Yeah, not only time, but they could also drain us financially if we're not careful. But I think here's the thing, when we're young and starting out, and I'm not as young as I used to be, but you take you and your wife starting, when you decided to go back to the ranch and start from scratch again, start, out on your own that way. In the beginning, we'll do just about anything we can do to make a dime so that we can stay in business. We'll ride colts, we'll shoot horses, we'll take in outside cattle. Well, I don't know anything about sheep. Yeah, bring me your sheep, or, whatever enterprise it is, because we want to live this lifestyle and we want to have this business. We want to be successful. But I think there comes a point in time, even, talking about a clean slate, let's do an enterprise analysis and calculate a gross margin on each enterprise. I think there's a time in life we look back at that and say, okay, does it meet a certain threshold? In other words, does it make enough money that it truly contributes in a big enough fashion to be part of this business going forward? So the same thing. I mean, you could have 2 or 3 mares and we're raising ranch horses, just for us. And now all of a sudden we've got 10 or 15 mares, and it's taking a lot of time to train colts and halter break weanlings and et cetera, et cetera. There comes a time you have to look at that and say, okay, well, how much money is this thing making and how much time am I investing in it? And that minimum threshold is going to be different for you than it is for me, than it is for the next guy down the road. And everybody has to define that. Worked with a couple one time that we're looking at doing a hunting enterprise, and the threshold was $20,000, and it was going to take a huge amount of time. And that's what they were going to make, about $20,000. And I looked at their business and said, there's a lot easier ways to make $20,000 than being involved in a hunting enterprise for 3 or 4 months every winter. And they weren't saying it. I finally just, kind of in an area west, I wouldn't walk across the road for $20,000, which obviously I would, but as long as the traffic wasn't bad or something. But we have to set that minimum threshold. If I'm going to have an enterprise on my ranch, it has to make a certain amount of dollars. And that could be 20, it could be 100,000, it could be 200,000. But whatever that is, it has to contribute in a big enough way, especially for the time that it takes to do something, in order, in my opinion, to be a viable part of a business. So every enterprise, you just have to look at that and say, okay, well, what's the minimum threshold that I'm willing to make to have an enterprise be part of my business? And what's the maximum amount of time that I'm willing to put into that enterprise to have it, be a viable part of the business? And I say my time, it could be an employee's time, but whatever. So I think we have to look at that also, those minimum thresholds, the gross margins, the quality of life, not only mine, but for my employees.
Mm-hmm. Let's take another break here. And when we come back, Allan, I want to jump into a conversation as folks are listening. And if you're probably one of two, you're either somebody that doesn't really like a lot of change, and so you may be stuck in a rut, or the business has plateaued a little bit, or you're a person that always likes change or always looking for the next opportunity, and you've accumulated a plethora of enterprises. And so we're going to talk about those two different types when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Barn Owl. It's what we use here on the X-Ring Ranch to watch our stock tanks, our hay yard, cow camp corrals. Real-time awareness starts with Barn Owl. It's peace of mind. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Are you tired of putting the wear and tear on your ranch pickup or your good side-by-side out checking stock tanks or reservoirs? Or maybe it's just keeping an eye on a remote ranch location. When you stop and you think about it and you start to calculate the cost of your time, fuel, and miles on your vehicles, you're going to scare yourself. But there really is a very simple and a reassuring solution, and it's called Barn Owl. Barn Owl off-grid cameras and smart alerts provide you that assurance, and there's no question it is a time and a money saver. From anywhere at any time, no Wi-Fi or power needed. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett, a ranch consultant and business coach, a good friend of mine for many, many years, and I always appreciate his take when we start looking and analyzing our ranch businesses. And Allan, when we left in the last segment, I said I want to talk about two different types of people out there. Ones that are not as open to change, kind of like probably feeling a little bit more stuck in a rut, and then some that are always looking for the next thing and have accumulated a plethora of enterprises and overwhelmed by that. And what brought me to that is when we were talking in the last segment, you said one of the first things to do when you're starting to look at, if you could start with a clean slate, what would that look like, is to really analyze each of your enterprises. And I know in the conversation that you and I had several days ago, we were talking about if you could try something new though, and you had there was no risk of failure in that, what would you do? And I think in the same breath that we talk about analyzing our enterprises that we currently have on hand, what is something new is also maybe something that's part of that clean slate.
Yeah, and if you look at a clean slate, I mean, we're talking mostly to ranchers. There's some farmers listening also, maybe some other people. But when we look at that, the clean slate is just that. We have this piece of land, and whether it's a ranch or farm, let's just wipe it off. Clean every enterprise off. We have no enterprises now. We just have this land. What is the best use of this land? What would raise my quality of life to the highest level? And again, time, money, purpose, relationships, those four things tied into quality of life. What would have to happen on this land? And I'll even take it a step further. I've had more than one client. I had one client that, I mean, they were here in my office and spent, I think, 3 days with me, and in a very safe environment where both spouses are free to truly express their most intimate feelings, I guess you could say, as far as business is concerned, and even personal life. And the wife said, I don't want to live where we're living. And the husband's jaw just dropped open. What? And she said, there's just too many bad influences around us that I don't want my children and grandchildren being raised in that environment. And they have to, since that time, they have sold the place and moved to a different ranch. And that's extreme clean slate. But even looking at, okay, I want to stay where I'm at. I enjoy, the area, our family enjoys it. We want to stay here. Well, let's just look at it from a clean slate. We have no livestock whatsoever. We have no crops. We have nothing. What is the best option for us today? And really look at that instead of from a traditional standpoint that this is the way we've always done things and we've plateaued or we're not as profitable as we'd like to be. Let's just look at it from clean slate. What do we want to do here? And part of that comes back to some of our own personal values and even the culture within our own company that we want to establish and want to maintain. The accumulators out there, well, we've accumulated, like you said, a plethora of different enterprises. I think, again, we've got to go back and look at those one by one and say, okay, does this meet my threshold of minimal amount of money that it has to generate to make it worthwhile to keep? And if it doesn't, why are we doing it? Why are we keeping it? And I would measure that from profitability, and I would measure it from the amount of time, and not just my time as a business owner or the CEO of the company, but from an employee's time. If we're spending way too much time for way too little money, we either need to fix that or get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Just a real quick question, and it's in regards to if somebody's going to try something new, and just kind of a quick answer from you. What's a step to move off the mark to begin to look at that new enterprise?
I do a financial analysis of it. Economic, let's look, is it going to be profitable? And does it meet the threshold, my personal threshold?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the two different types of people that we ended last segment with. And we've got folks that may be resistant to change, have been locked into a certain enterprise mix since grandpa was alive. And then we've got some that the grass doesn't grow under their feet because they're never there long enough. So let's start with the folks with no change, because I think there's inside of that, and I don't want to get too broad here, but inside of that, you've got physically people that don't want to change, that they're plateaued where the business is at, or they are coming onto the place. Maybe it's the next generation, and dad's on the place, or grandpa's on the place, or uncle's on the place, and they're resistant to change. They can't change because the main decision maker is not going to allow them to change. So from those type of people, what's your thoughts? I mean, tell me what you're thinking as far as to move on.
So it's that, I like to use an analogy, and you and I, and most of our listeners will know what the blinders are when we talk about blinders on horses. Race horses have blinders on them so they don't get distracted by the things off to a side. And if you go back and watch an old Western movie with a stagecoach where they had blinders on those horses, kept them focused straight ahead. And I think too many times in life, we have the blinders on and we have them on too tight, where we can't see enough out in front of us. And so what I like to do with people like that that are resistant to change is, all right, let's just take the blinders off for a minute and let's explore possibilities. And instead of, would you change to this enterprise, which, a yes or no kind of an answer is, let's explore possibilities. What would it look like if you did this or if you didn't do that? And let's explore that together just as a possibility, not as a recommendation, not as a you have to kind of thing. Let's just look at it from a possibility standpoint. And if we can do that, my experience has been that when people start looking at possibilities, the blinders tend to come off, and people that are kind of stuck in a rut or have plateaued and, this is the way we've always done it. When we explore together from just possibilities, they start seeing that, hey, there are options out there, and some of these options actually look pretty enticing. And I like to have people sleep on that for a day or two. I just want you to think about that. Just think of some of these possibilities. Let's come back and explore it again together. We're not making a rash decision here. We're just exploring possibilities. And I found that exploring possibilities with the question, what if, or what would it look like, instead of would you do it or could you do it, where it tends to be a yes or no response. It's just, let's explore possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Your first thought for somebody resistant to change, maybe it's dad, maybe it's grandpa, maybe it's whoever the decision maker is on the place. Your first thought as far as resistant to change and will not change, what's the consequence?
Too often the consequence is that the business is not going to thrive, because the world is changing around us at a very rapid pace. And if we're not a step ahead, we're at least 2 steps behind, or maybe 3 or 4. I had a guy put it to me this way, and I gave him credit the first 2 or 3 times I told this, and then after that I just say this is what I've always said, but I stole it from somebody else. We can resist change, we can complain about the change that took place, or we can try to control the direction of the change. And I want to be one that controls the direction of the change. So we can resist change, and later on it comes back and bites us. We can complain about the change that just happened, or we can try to control the direction of the change. And to me, those are the people that I find are pretty exciting to work with. If you're trying to control the direction of a change, because change is inevitable. It's all around us all the time. It's weather change, it's market change, it's somebody dies, somebody gets born, somebody gets married, somebody gets divorced, we get a new president. I mean, change is inevitable. It's everywhere. We had a fire, we had a drought. That's a change. So let's look at the change. So let's try to control the direction of the change. And to me, that's being on top of market. It's having a drought plan. It's being prepared. It's looking down the road at the market that we're seeing today, looking down the road and trying to figure out best case scenario, where it's going to be a year from now and what's the best place for us to be in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And in your case, you have son in college and the military. And if they look at coming back, we have to anticipate that and start controlling the direction of that change. So that to me is, let's control the change, because it's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the other person that just can't get enough of one thing. Definitely not resistant to change. And we just got a short time in this segment here, but as we talk about somebody like that, that's always just going and reaching for the next enterprise out there, boy, that's dangerous too. As much as being stuck in a rut is, so is always reaching for the next thing and being too maybe overly aggressive.
I love the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and he talks about doing less but doing better. And even Ray Hyde, the great horse lunchroom that's deceased now, but sometimes less is more. Working with a horse, sometimes we have to do less to get more. I think that's what we need to look at here is, all right, let's rein this thing in a little bit. And let's do that enterprise analysis again and see what's working and what's really working, what's not working. And let's figure that out, and let's hone in on the things that are really working and rein in or get rid of the things that aren't working, and then build something really great with what really works instead of being like a shotgun that just sends a whole bunch of BBs out. As the further out they go, the more spread they become. Let's get a precision rifle and hone in on something that's working, and let's really fine tune that. And let's make sure that we understand what the target is and we hit that target regularly. Instead of taking that shotgun approach, let's take a precision rifle approach.
Mm-hmm. You bet. All right, let's take another break here. And in our final segment, I want to kind of wrap all of this up. And some of this is going to get back into, we're going to address an element of company culture and how that plays into some of this as well. Maybe you say, well, I don't have a company, I don't have a bunch of employees. You probably have other people that help you. Probably have family members or maybe somebody that comes out of town and help you out. There's culture on your ranch operation. We're going to talk about that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelb and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelb and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and had excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelb and Balancer genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, already a good conversation that we've had. And as we start to kind of tie a lot of this together and wrap it up, essentially we started today talking about if you had a clean slate and you could start over, you could do something differently, what would you do and how would you go about doing that kind of a thing? I want to talk now a little bit more about the company culture, because I think sometimes that's part of the process that overwhelms people, because there's been things established in your ranch business, whether it's you have family members helping you, or maybe you have employees or whatever that may be. And there's just things have been done and set a precedence that you feel like you just can't get out from underneath. You see that often?
Yeah, and I think we kind of fall into that from a couple different angles. One is, we start out as mom and pop business, husband or wife together, our kids are involved. And then, we have to hire some day help occasionally. And, the day help maybe doesn't fit our culture or what we'd like to see on the ranch, maybe the way they treat their horses or their stockmanship skills or lack thereof, or, maybe their language or whatever it is. But we put up with it because it's just for a couple, 3 days, 2 or 3 times a year. So we do that, or a week or two. And then eventually with the business grows and now we have to hire somebody full time, and we hire somebody full time. And yet we don't really know how to be employers, and we haven't established that company culture. Well, the company culture needs to be based on our values as owners and leaders of the business. It's based on our values and what we want to see, the way we want horses to, the way we want them to handle livestock, the way we want to graze grass, the way we want our relationships with, whether that's cattle buyers or suppliers or even, employer, employee, etc. And if we don't establish that, just by default, it just goes where it goes. So I think sitting down, as business owner or owners, as a management team and say, let's define what our values are and what we want our company culture to be. The other way we kind of fall into that is as somebody coming back to the ranch and dad's there or grandpa's there or uncle, like you said earlier, we just assume the culture that they've already established. And that may be good, it may not be good, or there may be some changes that we want to make, but we don't think to make them because they're still around. Or it could be that we're a professional ranch manager and we just took a job as a manager on this place, and employees are already in place. And so we just inherit what's there. And sometimes we need to step back even as a manager of a business and say, okay, what is the culture that I want established here? And what do I want to see? And maybe, go to the family, the absentee owners, and say, okay, what is the culture that you want? Now let's have that discussion and then establish that, because it's based on values and the way we treat animals, the way we treat the land, the way we treat other human beings. And if we don't establish that culture, then we'll just go with the way the wind blows.
Mm-hmm. I feel like sometimes it's just tough. You've set that precedence, and yet that if you could go back and you could do something different, you would start to. And the other thing too, there's an issue, in terms of hypocrisy. Don't do what I do what I say. That's a part of this as well.
Yeah. And again, as a leader, that's where we've got to step up and say, okay, well, if this is what we want our culture to be, I first and foremost, I have to live that culture myself. And if that means I don't beat on my horse, then I don't beat on my horse. Does that mean I don't cuss at the cows? I don't cuss at the cows. If it means I want good grazing management, then I have to practice that myself. And so internally, as a human being, going back to the last segment and this idea of change, if we're going to change anything in our business or even in our physical well-being, that starts in our mind and our mindset. So we have to change the paradigm that we see the world through and the lens that we view the world through. We have to make some mental changes, and sometimes those mental paradigms or the subconscious, I guess I would say, sometimes the subconscious has been ingrained for a long, long time. And it's just like you can get in a standard pickup and go shift gears and you don't have to think about it. But when you're first learning how to do that, you have to think about it. So consciously, you have to think about pushing in the clutch, letting off the gas, where the lever goes, each time until you finally get it. Once the subconscious understands that, you can sing along with the radio, you can talk on the phone, you can talk to somebody, and you can shift gears and you don't have to think about it. You just do it. Well, the negative side of some of the things that are subconscious controls have been there a long time, and we have to go back and consciously change that, whether that's we grab a hold of every new idea that comes along or we're resistant to change or anything in between. the subconscious mind has to be dealt with, and we have to overcome some of the ways that we think. And that requires some personal growth, and that has to happen before our business is going to grow. Mm-hmm. You have to grow personally, and it starts in our mind and our attitude and the way we see things before we can actually go out and make those changes.
Allan, as we get close to wrapping up our conversation, I want to address two different types of segments of folks that could be listening. One is going to be the decision maker, and one is, of course, not the decision maker. Maybe it's somebody that's working on the place or whatever. And first, so in the context of our conversation here today about a clean slate, and if you could, rewind, or if you could start over, if you could do something different. First, for the decision maker group, just your final thoughts here for them and advice for them as we look at this process of cleaning that slate, starting over, being overwhelmed. What could you do if you could do something different, and just some final thoughts for those folks.
The bottom line is, Justin, is we have a clean slate. Every morning we got to bed in it, and there's a clean slate. And in our business, it's a choice. We can choose to say, okay, I'm going to start with a clean slate, and I'm going to look at this business and see, okay, what's working and what's not working. And that's an option, and it's a choice. It's nobody's forcing us to keep business, status quo. That's a mindset of a business owner or business leader that doesn't make that change. So I would just encourage our listeners, those that are decision makers, you have a clean slate, period. Whether you take advantage of it or don't, that's your choice. But you have a clean slate, and you can look at your business and say, all right, I'm gonna on paper, here's a clean slate. On this chalkboard, this whiteboard, this electronic tablet, I'm gonna start with a clean slate, and I'm gonna map this out any direction I want it to go. And you're free to do that as a decision maker.
All right, let's talk about the not decision maker group of folks, because I know, in fact, I had an email from a gentleman. I think he's actually out of Wyoming, or Southeast Wyoming, Colorado. And just, what about the next group? Graduating college, headed back to a place, or maybe their folks' place, maybe a place somewhere. But at some point, they're not in the point right now that they're decision makers, but maybe they've been working on a ranch for several years and feel like things are stuck in a rut. Let's address that and your thoughts for those folks.
So just like the decision maker, those individuals get out of bed every morning with a clean slate. And if you feel like in your professional development, you've hit a plateau working at this particular ranch, or dad's not allowing you to progress, or grandpa's not, or your uncle's not, or whoever it is, the boss is not allowing you to progress, and you're not happy, you have a clean slate. Start over. And a college graduate has a clean slate. He doesn't have to go take the first job that comes along, or she doesn't have to. Find the one that fits. And if you can't find the one that fits, well, then find something, but realize that you're not stuck there in the rest of your life. And so if you're not happy where you are, then clean the slate and find a place that fits you better and that you fit better. And again, that could go along with horsemanship, stockmanship, grazing, ecological things. It could go along with your personal values that, hey, I want to take Sundays off and I don't get to take Sundays off, or I want to quit Saturday at noon, or I want my evenings free and I don't get that where I'm working. Well, then find another place to work where you can have that. Mm-hmm. And they're out there. I mean, finding good employees is about as hard as finding a good employer. Mm-hmm. Good employers are out there and good employees are out there. You just have to match yourself up with what fits best. And so you can start on paper and just say, okay, my perfect job, this is what it would be. And this is what I would be doing. Here's the responsibilities that I would have. Here's how much I would get paid. Here's the benefit package. And here's how much time I would spend in the job. And here's what I would do with my discretionary time. And put that on paper. There's your clean slate, and I will find it because it's out there.
Mm-hmm. Let's meld those two together. And how do they come together? Let's say, you've got the decision maker and the not decision maker, and, starting that clean slate over. For me, there's an element of just expectations and knowing what one wants, what each other wants.
Yeah. And I want to pick on that word expectations for just a minute. I don't use that word anymore, or I try really hard not to. I use agreements. Because agreements raises the bar from expectations. expectations tend to lead us to frustration and disappointment, where if we have an agreement, then we know how to hold each other accountable. And that agreement can be written down, even if it's father and son or employer-employee. Let's write out the agreement that here's what we're agreeing to with me coming to work here. Here's what we agree the company culture is. And I agree to work with this company culture. And if the boss isn't living it, and you can point it out and say, look, here's what our company culture says, and I don't see you doing that. Or here's what my responsibilities are as a decision maker. You can tell the non-decision maker, here's what your responsibilities are. Here's how we're measuring that. Here's the accountability measurement. And we're falling short, so we need to make an adjustment there. My experience has been when we're not in alignment there, and I use that word intentionally, when we're not in alignment, whether employee with employer or vice versa, the sooner we either get in alignment or we change jobs or change employees, the happier everybody is. Because if you're an employer and your employee's pretty good, but not fully in alignment, and you've got this agreement and you're holding him accountable, her accountable, and it's not quite working and you can't get it there, the sooner you get rid of it, the happier both people will be. Because you're frustrated, you're not living up to the agreement, or I can't get him there. He's frustrated that you keep trying to get him to this accountability level and he's not there. Make the change. The sooner you make the change, the happier everybody will be if the change needs to be made.
Mm-hmm. Well, Allan, we could probably go on for another 30 minutes because as you were talking and I've written down notes of other things I think about, we could probably go on. Unfortunately, there's a time limit on our show here today. I appreciate you joining us here and your take on all this. I think it's a big subject that's deep, can be as deep as we want to go with it and as broad as we want to go with it. But at the same time, it does narrow down specifically. And as you pointed out, I mean, it's every day we start with a clean slate. So I appreciate you joining us here today.
My pleasure, Justin. I always enjoy visiting with you. Thank you.
You bet. And if you'd like to reach out to Allan and visit with him about this and kind of pick his brain a little bit more about, even as he is a ranch consultant business coach as well, maybe that's something you'd be looking at. I will put an active link on his name. If you click on his name, that will be a way for you to get into his email, or you can also give him a call at 520-253-0040. By the way, be listening for a couple weeks. He and I are going to catch back up as we're going to continue on with some of this similar conversation, maybe directed in a different direction, but we're going to continue on and carry on with some of the questions that I had for him, as I had mentioned when we wrapped up our interview here today, and do another show with Allan on that. Stay with us. When we come back, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. That was quite a week. My take-home message is I'm proud and honored to live in a country where every citizen can go out and vote any way they want to, and you know that your voice is going to be heard. So I appreciate that very much. Now, folks, mark on your calendars December 5th to the 7th in San Antonio, Texas, at the Intercontinental Hotel. The U.S. Cattlemen's Association is going to have a shindig there. And folks, I want you to know that I've known the good folks over there at the U.S. Cattlemen's for many years now, and I'm very impressed with what I see. I trust them, and maybe you just ought to stop in and check them out. So that's December 5th, 7th, in the beautiful Intercontinental Hotel, downtown San Antonio, Texas. Be there. Back to you, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Captain, for that. And as we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, joining us, as he does each and every week, is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, we always like to look ahead a little bit, but I kind of want to look back because this last week, there was a part of the country that got hit with a pretty good snowstorm, winter storm, that doesn't always see this type of weather through their country.
No, I tell you, the storm pattern that hit Colorado and New Mexico and parts of Kansas and the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle regions, it was a storm that actually came through the area twice, and you don't see that very often. And one thing you don't see very often in the fall season is a storm able to tap into the Gulf of Mexico to really bring in a lot of water into the region. And the amount of moisture that has fallen in the form of rain and heavy wet snow over portions of eastern Colorado, parts of the northern and eastern parts of New Mexico, and then into the southern plains of Kansas and Oklahoma and parts of Texas. I mean, it's amazing amounts of moisture. In fact, erasing a lot of anything that was in the drought status in a lot of those counties there, and we could go back where this all started with the very heavy rains that caused that flooding in Roswell. It's been a pattern change from the end of October up till now that has really hit the central and southern Rockies and southern plains with a lot of moisture, and also really, really wet in the Corn Belt and Midwest. The script got flipped in many areas because, as we all know, large part of September and a large part of October for a lot of the U.S. was dry. But now we've just completely gone 180.
Yeah. So as we look ahead, as we were talking before we went on air, I said, man, I'm looking out just on my phone forecast. It doesn't look really anything major coming down the pike other than what you were telling me is just kind of continue to see us approaching that stair step down into a real winter weather pattern as you look further out.
Yeah, for anybody that's waiting for that big Arctic blast to come in to really put us into winter for good, we don't see that yet. For the next week to 10 days, though, we're going to continue to see systems come off the Pacific and then go coast to coast. And so that will provide a variety of weather for a lot of the lower 48 states. Canada's weather will be very busy as well. But the really cold air that would put us into, let's say, a widespread winter chill, not in the cards yet. I mean, probably are going to be talking about that in a week or two.
Okay.
But it will certainly, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and the downs are a bit more down and the ups are a little less up.
We just keep working down a little further. I noticed that even in our morning temperatures, after one of these cold spells go through, and then you have it the next day or so, that we just kind of keep getting just a little colder on those mornings after these quick storms have been through.
Yeah, a little more ice on the stock tanks in a lot of areas these days. That's for sure.
Yep.
Time to get those heaters out.
Yeah. All right. Don, appreciate the weather update. Look forward to talking to you next week.
See you then.
You bet. And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. If you want to tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast, you can find the link by going to his website at dayweather.com. Well, the latest issue of Working Ranch magazine is out, and I can guarantee that if I have my copy, I'm pretty sure everybody else has theirs as well. In fact, it's so new, it just came in the mail this past week. I haven't had a chance to grab it as we've been on the road following kids with state volleyball here in the state of Wyoming, and I'm sure for other folks that have kids in high school sports, whether it's football or volleyball, you're probably doing the similar thing this time of the year. So I'm looking forward to jumping in the next issue of Working Ranch magazine that is on my desk right now. By the way, if you don't have a subscription, it's pretty easy to get started by going to the website at workingranchmag.com, and you can start your subscription here today. Quick thank you to our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Barn Owl Cameras, Cowpuncher Coffee, it's what we drink here on the X-Ring Ranch and at the Working Ranch Radio Show studios, Inherent Select from Zoetis, Tank Toad, and Smart Lick. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, I'm your host, Justin Mills. Keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.